Delighted to welcome to the podcast the presenter of Final Furlong, as well as so many gigs that I can't even begin to start introducing you. Emmet Kennedy, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, Daniel. Thank you. And thanks for having me on the show.
No problem at all. Listen, Emmet, I want you to tell us a little bit for the listeners that aren't aware how you got into presenting. I guess you started off in radio, but what appealed to that starting off in your career?
I had no idea what I wanted to do. I hated school. I absolutely hated it, and I couldn't wait to get out of it. But my best friend, Donald McInerney, was insistent on doing transition year, and I was trying to talk him out of it so that we could get out of school as quickly as possible, and he wasn't having it. So I only applied for it because of Donald, because I couldn't bear the idea of being in school without my best friend. And it was the best thing I ever did, because I fell in love with a girl called Caroline Mullally, and I wanted to impress her, badly wanted to impress her. And there was a musical, so she had a part, and I got the part opposite her, and that meant that I got to dance with her and be around her. I was super quiet, bizarrely, up until third year. You wouldn't get 2 words out of me, and then all of a sudden I was doing impressions and singing, all to try and get her affection, which didn't work initially, surprisingly, but did work afterwards. And during that time, there was, you get to go on work experience, and I did work experience in Radio Kilkenny, which I'd listened to all my life growing up to that point. So 15 years of age, I went there. And then by a bizarre coincidence, the chief executive of the station was brought out to the school a year later for mock interviews, Dermot Healy. And I did my mock interview with him, and he said, do you want to come in and do the show called Youth FM? So I did that. It was open to most students. But the day afterwards, his secretary rang me, his assistant rang me and said, Dermot liked the show and he'd like you to come in and do some more stuff. So then I went from that to doing a Sunday morning show of my own. And I started doing cover shows. And then I was finishing school, which again, couldn't wait to get out of. I planned to take a year off and then go to college in Cork. And he rang me and said the afternoon show was available and would I take it? And at that point, I was 17 years of age, 17 and a half. I jumped at it. The station was in a licensing bid. So it was a bit of an uncertain time, but it was incredible to get that and bizarre to get it at that age. And it was a huge responsibility. I did not cope well with it at the start. The jitters and the bugs and the butterflies in my stomach nearly ate me alive. But the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it. And I got a call then from 96 FM from a guy called Neil Prendeville and Ronan McManamy, and they asked me to go there. And I was there for 15 years. I joined when I was 18. Worked there for 15 years, kind of went insane towards the end because it's music radio, and that was Kings of Leon. And this is Katy Perry. Gets really tiresome after a while, but I loved it. And I have great friends and great memories that I made from that station. And that led to other gigs. It led to a TV show for RTE. And I became frustrated that I couldn't talk about horse racing. There was some bizarre idea at 96 that you shouldn't talk about betting and that horse racing then shouldn't be mentioned. And that was a blessing in disguise for me, because it meant that I was listening to Football Weekly and the Game podcast. There wasn't a racing podcast of anything like that. And so I decided to do a show. And I came up with the name The Final Furlong, which I think I got from one of the guys in the Betfair forum. He was called The Final Furlong back in the old days. And started it from there. And now it is where it is. So yeah, that's my journey into the world of broadcasting.
It's amazing how quickly you can just switch from the radio voice there and then back was so quickly. It kind of freaked me out a bit. I was like, oh,
that was Katy Perry. Yeah.
So with the Final Furlong, you mentioned there that there weren't any horse racing podcasts, and you kind of wanted to start one. I guess what was the final push for you to start it? And were you nervous that there wouldn't be an audience, for example, for horse racing, because horse racing isn't viewed in the same numbers as football, for example?
Yeah, that was nerve-wracking. To be honest about it, I don't know what I expected or what I even thought. This idea formed in my head, and I could kind of see a picture of where I wanted it to go, but I never really expected it to get there. I just figured that if we did a show that was good, so I kind of styled it on an idea of, what if it was a Cheltenham preview night, but it's about racing every day, and you're not completely taking the piss, but you're being, the most important thing you have to be is informative. So you have to have strong opinions, and you have to have good people on, and then also be entertaining. And that brings you to the dreaded line of bands. which I hate banter as a term. Nothing can be pre-planned. It all has to just flow. And
One sec, did you get the questions I sent over to you, by the way?
Oh, yeah, and we were quite close to do that joke in 10 minutes' time, yeah? No problem at all.
Perfect,
The instant prize window. Yeah, I mean, there's an example. Like, there's a line from Woody Allen, the best ad-libs are pre-prepared. Woody Allen, he's a controversial figure, obviously, but that was said in a broadcast seminar one day, and I always thought, no, this is just off the cuff, because that's where you're going to get a real reaction. The best laugh I ever had on the podcast was the Vanessa Rile Pizzagate incident, which I don't know if you're familiar with that one, Daniel, but that was, if we planned that, it wouldn't have been funny. And what really made it funny is that she used this line about a guy held my box for me. And I was trying to be a gentleman and was like, don't say anything. And then Rory in the background goes, what? And that was it, gone. And that went viral, and it was nuts. Vanessa's brilliant. So natural humor has to flow naturally. You can't just script that kind of stuff and say, hey, Vanessa, you come in and say this, and then Rory, you say that. It's not going to work. Some people can do it for late night TV shows, but I don't like that kind of thing at all. So what was the plan? There wasn't one. There was just do a show, see how it goes. And it didn't do anything early on. Like there was nothing there. I've listened back to the first couple of shows, and oh God, I kind of cringe. But after a while, it did start to build traction, and it started to get attention. And I remember an owner commenting on one of the shows one day, and I remember thinking, oh my God, that's an important person who's listening to the show. Maybe we should reevaluate. And I was like, no, don't change anything. And then Ed Chamberlain, quote, retweeted the podcast one night. He was driving home from Sky Sports Premier League, or whatever it was called back in the day, Sky Sports 1, after doing Monday Night Football. And I nearly fainted when I saw that, because I didn't know Ed, and I certainly didn't expect that kind of an endorsement for the show. And it just kind of went from there. So I think the best thing about the show is the guests that we have. The really best thing about it is the listeners. Like, no show works without an audience. No show, exactly. And you are one, Daniel, and thank you very, very much for being one. Final Furlong Podcast mug on the way to you. And,
I'll just that, go on.
On the way. And the listeners are incredible. It's remarkable when you're not in Rona times and you can go to a racetrack and actually meet people to listen to the show, and the love that it gets on social media and sharing it, and then the content of guests that we have. I think Rory Zalargi's brilliant, Jane Mangan, Vanessa Rile. You know, there's some really, really strong people with very strong opinions, Kate Tracy. And it's great to work with them. And it's great to talk about a sport that I love. Racing is the sport that I'm a Liverpool fan, and what a couple of years it's been, but horse racing is always the sport that grabs my attention more. I'm not entirely sure why. There's something about it that's just a bit captivating. And to be able to do a show for one of the biggest websites in racing in the entire world is a gift. It's a blessing.
Just moving on, because I would have came to the show maybe 2017, 2018 when I discovered it, and I'd been listening to it for a few months, and I loved the analysis you guys did. And I think one point Kevin made about Leopardstown rails, I'm not sure if I'm remembering this correctly or not, was this horse, there's like a reining on the right that means that a horse, if he's having trouble right-handed, it's not as obvious as in Cheltenham. So I made that point for whatever this horse was. I've forgotten, to some lad at a urinals in Leopardstown, going, this is why he's got a right chance. And he just goes, you got that from the Final Furlong. And my heart, I was like,
brilliant.
Yeah. Kevin Blake said it. Yeah, Kevin Blake said it. Yeah. And then next thing, everyone's like, oh yeah, listen to that. So they have the bathroom talking about this horse, and this is why we're going to back it. But I guess it just shows the community of listeners. And after that, I made sure I referenced the Final Furlong before using any of those opinions. But I guess it just shows how tight-knit a group horse racing is, as well as your listeners to the show.
Yeah, God bless that listener, by the way. I kind of want to send him a Final Furlong Podcast mug now as well. That's brilliant. Yeah, and it's a bit surreal. We did the world is such a strange place now. But Jess Stafford, Declan Ricks, and I did a Cheltenham preview with Paul Nicholls at Ascot back in February.
Betfair, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the Betfair night in Ascot. And the night before, there was a torrential storm, and it was genuinely touch and go that it would actually go ahead at all. So we were very relieved that it did, and I didn't know what to expect in terms of a crowd. Ascot is by far the fanciest place I've done any show anywhere ever. I was kind of surprised they were letting me in to the King Edward the fifth. Yeah, the King Edward enclosure. Let's go with that. Yeah.
We'll
Anyway. But what was surreal was the amount of people who turned up, and that there was a crowd of lads from Tipperary, and they decided to come to Ascot for the Cheltenham preview instead of going to one day at the Cheltenham Racecourse itself, because we were doing the preview night. And that just it fried my head. And the Wi-Fi was terrible in the press centre. So I actually went up to where the room was, and I was doing all of this. Well, my intention was to do a lot of research beforehand. And people started coming up to me and saying, "You're doing the show later on, aren't you?" And I was like, yeah. And I just ended up talking to them instead for the whole day and watching the racing with them, and surnames, awful fall. And I loved it. I loved just meeting different people who listen to the show from all kinds of different backgrounds and different countries. There's a guy called Paul who does a lot of work in France, and he'd managed to get himself there for the day. Tony Deacon, who's listened to the show since its inception, coming along with loads of different friends and husbands and wives. A wife who listens to the show, and the husband has no interest in racing, but she makes him listen to it, and they were there as well. It was just a lot of fun, and it's very humbling, genuinely very humbling, to meet people who are as invested in the show as we are. And that's what it's about. You know, it has to be that. It has to be about our audience, because if it's not, you don't have a show. And it's incredible that people like it, and I don't take that for granted at all.
Yeah, I think the best thing about the show, I guess, is, you know, aside from the really good analysis, which there genuinely is, for making a bet, in terms of the little one-liners that are just so out of context anywhere else. You know, like, I'd be often at Cheltenham, a few points of me going, quoting your race or see you in Dubai one, it's the lucky 31s, the lucky 63s, the lucky 69.
The lucky 69!
And we will see you in Dubai. Stuff like that, quotes like that. Yeah, I guess make the show.
What was the one Kevin had? It'll be like Sheikh Mohammed with little bags of cash up and down the lines, lads. Yeah, that kind of stuff just it makes it. And there is a little sense of humor that goes through each show. Look, not every show is going to be a laugh a minute. I don't think it should be, because I'm not a comedian, and nobody else in the show is either. But Declan Ricks, for example, is a guy who's just so witty. He's one of the best and most hard-working analysts I've ever worked with in racing. And if I ask him a question, he'll have the answer, because he'll have studied it for 17 hours the day before and the day before that as well. If anything, Rixie is one of the people who's probably over-prepared most, but it means that he's unflappable. He's got everything. And he's also just got these instant one-liners. And yeah, people like that make the show what it is. Vanessa literally telling someone to F off on the show because they've stolen her horse before she's got the chance to say it is just vintage. So yeah, little quips and one-liners like that make a difference to the show. And I think if you listen to podcasts like Second Captains and Football Weekly, Max Rushton, Barry Glendenning, like, there is that kind of a dynamic there on those shows as well. And they'll probably tell you the same thing. You can't force that. It's either there or it isn't. It either happens or it doesn't. And thank God we're very lucky that we have a very, very talented group of people to rotate in and out of each show. And thankfully people like it, touch wood, with the help of God.
Yeah, I'm moving on a little bit before we get into horse racing itself as a sport. You mentioned a couple of other gigs. Do you want to go through a couple of them, because we were chatting just before we came on air there? Start off maybe with the poker commentator, which again I'd forgotten until doing a bit of research for this, and I was like, oh yeah, he talked about this in the Final Furlong.
Politician, model, actor. No, yeah, I did. Noel Hayes was on the show with me, but long before that, I'd met Noel at the races. I think I met him in the Curragh and then Leopardstown. So we became friendly, and Paddy Power were looking at someone to host a poker tournament, the Paddy Power Poker Irish Open, or the Irish Poker Open as it's now known. And he said, nah, not that guy. I've got a guy down in Cork. And he said, just record like a 10-second link and send it in. I was like, what? I'd never done a demo before. I honestly never had. So I just sent it forward and I wasn't really expecting much. And he goes, yeah, you're in. Bring your drinking boots. So at the time, it couldn't have been better. It was 2009. Neil Channing had won the Irish Open the year before, and I was genuinely in awe of him because I was watching him on late night poker. Like the poker boom was really there. It was everywhere. Channel 4 had the Premier League, Party Poker Premier League, which was a really fun show. The Devilfish, who passed away a few years ago, God rest him, he was a mad character, but a brilliant player. And Phil Hellmuth is another big, larger-than-life character who's an absolute tosser in real life. But anyway,
Are you serious?
He's
no.
just the worst in real life. But hey, look, nobody can be perfect. It's a bit like, doesn't James Corden look like a really nice guy? He's not. He's not a nice guy. Yeah. So anyway, the glass panel for the hole cards, he would do this thing where he'd look at the hole cards and he'd go, "What, Devilfish? What should I do?" as he's commentating. And he did that when we were commentating on him. So, and he was listening to us on the live stream. He was listening to our live stream.
So they can hear the commentary while they're playing.
Now, we didn't have access to the whole cards during the live stream commentary, because if we did, that would have been really, really sus. So we had to guess what they had when we were doing it live, and then afterwards we'd redo it for the actual edited package. And what was really weird was Phil Hellmuth, this superstar of poker, was like being really nice on the table and having fun with us. But then afterwards he talked to Porrick Parkinson and I'm like, this little speck of nothing. Just like, get off my shoe kind of thing. But yeah, 2009, it was the first year I did it. I was extremely nervous, and I was even more nervous when Neil Channing came along and joined me in the commentary booth. The next day, Phil Lack, who's a big American player, came along with Jennifer Tilley, his partner, and we ended up talking about philosophy and ethics. And he was saying, whenever you're at a featured table, you see people who are drinking. There's like a one-outer on the river, and it's a king. And you'll hear someone say, "No king, no king," and the king falls. And it's because the universe doesn't understand yes or no. It only hears you say king, so it gives you the king. And this kind of thing is what he was saying. Like, if you don't want a 7, don't say 7. And he really believes all this stuff. And it was just a fascinating conversation that had nothing to do with poker. And the guys who ran it loved that kind of stuff. So that's what we would do then. So with Fergal Nealon and Darragh Kearney and David Lappin and loads of other really cool people, we would talk about what it's like to go on the road in poker. I did it from 2009 to 2005. It's the Paddy Power Poker Irish Open, the Paddy Power Poker Irish Winter Festival, Poker Stars, Late Night Stars of Poker 40, and the Full Tilt Poker Galway Festival with my partner in crime, Rebecca McAdam, who is an absolute superstar. And I loved it. I loved meeting the people. I loved the whole poker atmosphere and this really strange world where everybody is taking each other on, and at the same time they're swapping percentages with one another, and they're helping each other out, and they're giving each other advice. It's a bit of a surreal landscape, but the Final Furlong had just started to properly take off once we hit into 2016, and I was offered it again that year, and I decided not to do it. And ironically enough, I was going to do it this year. I was going to come back and do it this year, and Rona hit, and that was the end of that. But I still love the poker world and the poker bubble. It's not as big as it once was. It is. The other one. Hold on one second. I have to pay for 2 Wi-Fis. Yeah, cool. Yeah, like the poker bubble had kind of peaked around then, so I decided to leave it, and I was going to go back. But I loved it, and it was weird to meet like famous people that you've watched on TV and that you genuinely admire, and they're superstars, and now you're commentating alongside them. It was a very strange thing. But I would say that the success of the podcast, largely in terms of if I do a good job on it, comes from that. Because you're on the spot. They could be 14-hour days at times. And that's not a complaint. I loved it. And I loved that. I loved the fact that it was completely unscripted, and there couldn't be dead air, and you had to go and do it for 5 days in a row. and then you were contractually obliged to go into the bar and get epically drunk afterwards, and then go back on the air with a hangover the next day. And Jesse May was a guy who I'd listened to as a commentator for years. And the first time I did the live stream, Noel Hayes and I took the piss out of Jesse May and Porrick Parkinson. And Noel was saying, "Think he's got a hand here, Jesse?" And I was going, "Oh my God, oh, the humanity, the river." And that night, he turns up and he shakes my hand. He says, "Hey man, I heard you taking the piss out of me. It was great." I was like, "Oh my God," like I wanted to fall into a hole as quickly as I could, because I've lost so much admiration for him. And not quite sure where he gets his energy from. But doing that meant that my focus on music radio, which was something I genuinely loved as a kid and really desperately wanted to do, that died. And talk radio became the thing that took over for me. And I wanted to do that. And I got to do it at 96 FM for a while. I got to do the current affairs show a few times, and I loved doing that. And that was it. My head was turned then. I just had no interest in music radio anymore. And I decided to focus on sports broadcasting and speech radio and voiceovers. And that's what I've been doing since the end of 2017, which I'm touch wood, thankfully, is going okay, I think.
Yeah, I was reading somewhere you're at the moment you're either in the process of recording an audiobook or as the voice, as in you're not releasing the book, but your voice is the voice of the book, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I am making sense.
Yeah, you are. It made more sense than I did explaining it, I would think. There's a weird story to that. I was paid half on completion of half, and then completed it. And the author wanted to change some of the stuff that he did, and basically it's now being kind of like rewritten. So I have to redo the other half of it. So it's been delayed, but yeah, I've done that. I'm the voice of an airliner, but I think I might only be the voice that you hear if things go wrong, as in my voice is brace, which is not what you want to hear. But one listener did pick it up. They were on an international airline. They went, "Not you." It's not the same voice, but it's me. So there's stuff like that. And I like doing that kind of stuff. Most of that work is all dried up now because of Rona, to be honest. Like all the voiceover stuff is gone. And look, that's again not a complaint, because thankfully I've other irons in the fire. But if I've learned anything over the last few years as well, it's that I did in 2017 and 2018. I kind of felt as though I couldn't say no to any job that came along, particularly one that I didn't deem myself worthy for. I felt I had to take and do it, and I enjoyed doing it, but I burnt myself out completely. And my mother she suffered from cancer, and only yesterday I was bringing her to get a mammogram done, a checkup. We get the results on Monday, hopefully, touch wood, all's good. And I came back from Glorious Goodwood. I was working with ITV and TalkSport that week. And I remember coming back, and Mam was asking me how was stuff. And I was rabbiting on about the UK and this and that. People that annoy you. One individual in broadcasting who would annoy you. And how great the people were aside from that. And I said, "And how are you?" And she told me, and I fell apart. And I think that my focus and my priorities really changed after that. So I tend to focus on what I like doing. If people are happy to have me do it, then I'll do it. But I don't push myself to the extent that I was. I wasn't enjoying life. I wasn't happy. I just felt like I had to say yes to everything, and I didn't. And that was a lesson that I learned there.
You mentioned your mother there. She was a big part of your life growing up, from the start of your story, I guess.
Yeah. So my father was a jerk. It's probably what the Americans would say. A pretty violent individual. And it was 90s Ireland. So he was a principal of a primary school, and he was a special advisor to a Minister for Sport, State, Youth and Education. And he manipulated all of those positions to his absolute. He was a street angel, house devil, physically, verbally abusive, vicious. And somewhere along the line, my mother managed to just decide, right, this is it. We got to go, or he's got to go, and took on a case to get a separation from him. Divorce wouldn't have been a thing. I think you could get it. I'm pretty sure the referendum had passed, but it still wasn't really the thing to do. And that was not a happy time. That was my childhood was pretty awful. I think that's another reason why I wanted to leave school. But she's genuinely the strongest person I've ever met. And I don't know where the strength came from for her to fight that, because it was 9 different times. I remember I had to go to court 9 times. I don't know how many times Mam had to go. And she was really screwed over by her legal aid team. The whole thing could be a film. And it wasn't until I started working, like Mam had to work 4 jobs to put food on our plates. And I remember I worked in a garage. I worked in 2 different bars when I was in school. Again, loved it. So much experience that I got from that. Experience about people and experience about valuing things as well, and making friends. And there was some great memories made there too. But it was tough. It wasn't easy. But one of the things that Mam did was she ran a bookmakers, and she ran a chain of them. And I got to know betting through that, and I got to know what betting is like. And that's where the whole Lucky 31 patent came in, because while some will say they're a mug bet, Mam, having been a bookmaker, will say, well, one thing a bookmaker hates is to give anybody any kind of money at all. And if you have one winner, they have to pay back something, and they don't want to do that. So that's the bet to do. It took me a long time and a few mistakes to learn, you know what, the patent probably is the way to go, actually. Lucky 31 is the way to do it. But Mam set a remarkable example of character and of strength and determination to me, because the alternative was the most garbage human being that you could possibly imagine. And I never forgot how incredibly brave she was to do all that she did, and to stand up to somebody who was so brutal to her and to me. And I'm not entirely certain where that strength comes from. I don't think I would have been able to do it. But she's someone that I admire greatly and love dearly. And definitely has had a huge impact on me and my life. And the more I look at, my mother's maiden name is Dunphy, and the more I look at the Dunphys, I'm a Dunphy. You know, I have my mother's brown eyes, I have my mother's hair color, I have the jaw structure of my Uncle Tony and my late Uncle Bob, and they all loved racing. Bob, Tony, the Hickey, Mick, they all loved horse racing. And so I would, after school, I would go to Uncle Tony's and watch the racing with them. And I managed to get them a dodgy set-top box, which had the racing channel on it, which was quite, I think it was pricey enough back in the day, but the racing channel was for free on this dodgy set-top box. And the boys loved it. The lads loved it. So yeah, racing really came in at quite a young age for me as a sport to be introduced to, because Mam was working in a betting shop as one of 3 jobs, and my uncles were betting on it, and watching Cheltenham with them, going to the Thyestes Chase meeting in Goran Park with them, being way too young to appreciate it, and the crowd's been nuts, but it was a great experience. I fell in love with the sport, and I'm not from a racing background. There was nobody in our family who was a jockey or a trainer or an owner. It was just a sport that I fell in love with, and I'm still in love with today.
Yeah, because it must have been a challenging time, I suppose, being an only child with your mother, and I suppose having that horse racing avenue with the likes of your uncles as well as your mother as well, I guess allowed you to grow up with using the sport as well. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it provided a distraction that I badly needed, and it was also, you weren't stuck for anything to talk about, because if you didn't want to talk about football, my Uncle Tony, God rest him, Tony was really a father figure to me. Like, he was incredibly kind, and that was one of the other things as well, is that he died very suddenly, and it was about 6 months after we'd finally got my father out of our lives. There was a protection order issued against him, and everything had been settled. Everything was done. So the world seemed calmer, and then Tony was gone, and it shook everything. It shook every foundation. It shook my belief. I didn't know what the hell the world was, and I became a very, very angry young man. Boy, probably. But racing was an outlet, and it was a distraction, and there would be conversation with the lads about Arkle and how great he was. And then that introduced me to the whole history of racing as well, and learning about Nijinsky and Dawn Run and all these great horses that I couldn't see live for obvious reasons. I didn't exist. But now hearing these stories about these horses, and then when you'd see a horse yourself, like Hurricane Fly or Cotto Star, you feel, hang on a second, Cotto Star, right, he's not going to carry a big weight to go and win an Irish Grand National or a Hennessy. But damn it, he might have given him a right old race in the Gold Cup, and cue a debate then that would kick off. I enjoyed that. We still have my Uncle Paddy and my Uncle Jack. They're very interested in sport, and Jack takes an interest in my career when I'm on Talk Sport and doing the show as well. Probably racing is one of the few things from my childhood that's probably a good memory, and that I'll happily look back on, whereas the rest of it just ends up getting locked away.
What exactly with horse racing inspired you in terms of, was it the start? Because a lot of people, obviously what's associated with horse racing is betting. Was it that end of it things, or you seem to talk a lot about the history, and it's something that's grown on me over recent years is the actual horses themselves and the stories behind the people in horse racing as well. What kind of, obviously it was the foundation of your surroundings with your mother and your uncles being involved, but what kind of appealed most to you about the horse racing itself, and going, for example, when you're in Gordon Park and watching a race live?
The one thing that I could give my father credit for was he would I won't even give him credit for that, but he would ditch me on a Sunday to a stables, and it was show jumping. And so for a brief period of my life, I got to be around show jumpers, and I got to see them and ride them badly, very, 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 very badly. Ended up in a ditch on more than one occasion. But they all have their own personalities. They're an incredible animal to be around, and you can't not but fall for them when you see them. You can't not but some of them can be really mean, like humans can be really mean, and others can be lovely. And I think that was probably a blessing, that I saw them that way at a young age first, before the betting thing became more of an influence to me. I think the horses and the people around it, as you said, are the stars. And I think Horse Racing Ireland are very good at promoting that. They're very good at promoting people like Aidan O'Brien and Willie Mullins and Gordon Elliott, and they're the stars of our sport. And the horses that they have, Tiger Roll, Hurricane Fly, and pushing those horses to the front of the media. Whereas I don't necessarily think that is done as well in the UK. It's done very well in France too. And that's what always attracted me to it. What always grabbed my attention most was Aidan O'Brien, Martin Pipe, Tony McCoy, Barry Geraghty, Ruby Walsh. These people are heroes. They're absolute legends. And Ruby Walsh was called Iron Man one day, and they had a scan of him. Ruby Walsh is not Iron Man. He broke every single bone in his body.
It was in the Irish Independent. It's the picture. We'll link it in the description. We'll find it. Where it just has his body, and they just point exactly where he's broken, and there's nowhere that they're not pointing arrows to.
If you can just imagine an X-ray of an individual and every single bone is broken, that's Ruby Walsh. And somehow he would continue to get back up on a racehorse and then be the most elegant and powerful and incredible jockey we've probably ever seen. So it was always about them. It was about the individuals, and then the star talent that either a trainer like Aidan O'Brien with High Chaparral or Rocket Gibraltar was bringing along, and the characteristics that he would describe about those horses, or John Gosden or Sir Michael Stout with a legend of horse as well, Aidan O'Brien with Isterbrack. These horses would grab your attention, and that's what drew me in. Isterbrack really grabbed my attention, and really, I think was responsible for bringing me into the sport an awful lot more than I had been previously. And then when you were mentioning about being at the races, the trip down to Goran or the trip to the Curragh with the lads, you're on a bus, and I was too young to drink, but they'd have a few cans of Budweiser and they'd be having the crack. And I don't know why it was Budweiser. Maybe it was because it was the Budweiser Irish Derby, and they just decided, yeah, let's have that. Or there'd be a bottle of Jameson going around, and they'd all be telling stories, and they'd be telling stories about their childhood. And everybody back then, they all had nicknames for each other. So my uncle Tony was the Sam, Mick was the Hickey, the Kearney.
I heard you say Hickey, and I was like, who's he talking about there? But
yeah, that was my uncle Mick. God rest him. He was a West Ham fan for his sins. Yeah, they would all be telling stories about the old Castlecomer and Kilkenny and growing up in the town, and it was a mining town, and there was nothing here. There was nothing here, but it's a town that has a rich history, and it now has a very impressive centre, if you dare go to it in the Rona time, called the Deer Park, which was renovated. And I've grown up in Comer. I didn't even realise that was there, because it had become all overgrown, and they've cut it back now, and you get to see a history of what the town was like back in the mining days. But I think that like football and hurling, obviously I was a big hurling fan. I couldn't play the game at all. Golf I liked and was reasonable at. Football I was okay at it. But racing, I think because you don't know what a racehorse is going to do, and you can dream about a racehorse being, if you've seen a horse like George Washington win the Phoenix Stakes and you think that horse is going to win the Guineas, and you're debating with people who are saying there's more holes in his form than Swiss cheese, someone said to me one day. And when he bolted up in the 2000 Guineas, I remember not even seeing him cross the line because I was lying on the ground going, yes! And then there'd be other ones where you've backed a horse and you got it badly wrong. And the horse, one cool cat, pretty much pulled up in the 2000 Guineas. Disaster. So, but these horses keep you warm over the winter. You debate with your friends about them. You debate with your family about them. You think about what could be, what they could achieve. That's there with football in terms of players coming through, but it's not the same. You don't get the same appreciation, maybe, or the same affection. There's something about a racehorse and the potential that horse has. And then when you learn about the whole process of breeding and how a horse is bred and how they choose a sire to be matched up with a mare and what they expect to get from that, and then that horse has to be broken, as in prepared to be trained and then transferred to a trainer, but only after the process of going through the sales ring, and somebody somewhere decides this horse is worth £1 million and I'm going to go to war to get it, or discards the horse and goes, no, don't want that horse, not any good. And a horse like Attraction was a terrible walker in the parade ring. Nobody wanted her, and she won a classic. There's something quite unique about the sport, and it's always grabs my attention, and it will always be about the horses. It will always be about them. And whenever you're at the Curragh or Leopardstown or Cheltenham and they're doing the Parade of Heroes and you see Hardy Eustace walk in and Hurricane fly, you're like, oh, heroes. And the memories that you have from their victories and their defeats and those days that you were there on track to see them at their highs and lows is something that can't be replicated by any other sport. And it's something that we really need to try and capture and push forward better. There needs to be a better job done of promoting that. I think we try and do it on the podcast, and I hope we do it reasonably well there. I think Sky and Racing TV do a good job of it, but that's a very important aspect of the sport to try and push.
We actually had Kevin Day on the podcast, and he caught us a bit off guard because we asked him his sporting hero or best sporting hero he met, and he said when he met Desert Orchid for the first time, working on BBC's coverage, he said he turned around and he just was in floods of tears, and it got me a bit off guard. I was like, oh, let's just talk about racing now, Kevin. Can you stay for 20 more minutes? But it is all about the horses, like you said. I want to talk a little bit about Cheltenham. What was your first experience of going to Cheltenham like?
Oh, the first experience was the November meeting. Stormes, Barry Garrity rode 2 winners on the day for Martin Pipe. McCoy was like a bastard on the day because Garrity was on the right horses. I think it was, I can't remember. I remember Stormes was 1, and he won the Paddy Power chase as well that day. Barry did. I can't remember who it was now. My encyclopedic memory for racing is failing me, but I remember Stormes winning. He was a tiny little thing, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was young. I was a teenager. Didn't have much money. I was able to go over with some cousins. Didn't return to Cheltenham until I think it might have been Annie Power in the Champion Hurdle.
2016.
Yes, 2016. Annie Power's Champion Hurdle, and that was incredible. I didn't back her. I backed Graham Wiley's horse, who finished third. Nicholls Canyon. Yeah, an absolute hero of a horse. I remember backing him each way, but we were down at the winning post, and I will never forget Ruby Walsh flying past on Any Power as he's waving to the crowd, and it just felt like power flying past. And years before that, it would have been 2007. It was my first time visiting Coolmore, and for some reason, there was someone there who was looking at stallions to breed, and I was certainly not doing that. But for some reason, the guy who was bringing us around told the stable lads, "Bring out Rock of Gibraltar." And they brought him out, and I put my hand on his neck, and I remember just feeling power course through my hand. That's what it felt like. And obviously, he was a real hero of a racehorse for me as well. But Cheltenham is, I've been back now a good number of times, and it's incredible. It's absolutely bonkers. And I'll happily watch it on TV and cover it for radio. But being there, whether you're working or you're just there with friends to enjoy it, there is nothing that comes close to it. And maybe one of the reasons why is because we build up to it for a whole year. Everything, like the Tinkle Creek is an important race, the King George is an important race, the Lexus is an important race. Cheltenham is Cheltenham. Like, that is the be all and end all. And if there's one thing that I could selfishly say is at least Cheltenham managed to get ahead and Rona didn't kill that on us, because if it had, I think we'd all be in depths of despair. But it's a place where memories are made, and where you're able to remember great stories. And actually, I remember 2016 now, Final Furlong Podcast listeners yelling at me on Tempor 2, because I'd put him up at 20s in the Ultima. I was badly wrong about Min. Ugh. Dovan was too short to back in the Arkle, and then along came on Tempor 2, and he took the Ultima. And I remember listeners who, sorry, I don't know your names, but I remember a lot of people yelling on Tempor 2 at me, and I was just going, yeah, hey, great, and trying not to give the money back to the bookmakers on the day. It's a special place. You've obviously been as well, Daniel.
Yeah, I think it's maybe because of lockdown now, but I'm getting a bit emotional talking about Cheltenham. Is that weird?
So am I, actually, yeah.
I was like, oh no. No, 2015 was my first go, believe it. How lucky is that? That was the year of the Ruby Walsh, Woody Mullins. We went over UCD, and
that was the year of Annie Power's fall.
So we ended up going
the £50 million fall.
Yeah, we ended up going 3 years in a row. So that 2015 was the first. And so who won the first? Sorry, Duvan, Supreme, Undeso, Ultima. And then
Faugheen.
I Faugheen, but I was big into horse racing, but not from I didn't have a clue how to tip, so I just put this lad's 3 horses on in the Ultima. And then I was like, I withdrawn a bit of money, and I was like, geez, I'm doing very well for the day now. I'm just going to put like a €1 combination tri-cast. Now, I would never in a million years do that in an Ultima ever. But then what happened was I'd €15 left in the account, so I said, I've got to make it 250. And I cheered on the Druid's nephew, who won. A Grand Gesture, or I might have got that name wrong, was second. And then Gallant Oscar gets up on the line. So I'm cheering Druid's nephew and go, I think I've won that tri-cast as well. And then I looked at my phone, and it was like €5,000 for
yes!
That was like me. I was like, right, it's 25 win on jet ski, 25 win on jet ski, 25 win on jet ski. I'm queuing up. I see the 5,000, and I'm like, £50 win on jet ski.
But thank God you didn't go $5,000 win jet ski.
Yeah, that's jet ski for the champion hurler, by the way, who didn't win. So
yeah,
I was like, why wasn't I on Faugheen? I wasn't thinking. And then Annie Power, so I only had the small accumulator for her fall, but I just remember I wasn't so upset that I'd lost the money. It was a sporting moment where the emotion of the moment just got to me. And there was a horse that was down on the line, and we all thought it was Annie Power for whatever reason when we looked up. So suddenly it all kind of hit dawn on me. Imagine if something had happened to Annie Power on the fall. Now, luckily, someone pointed out she was okay, but I think the whole moment, I've been at plenty of sporting events and football, Gab, I've never heard a groan like it at Cheltenham.
The only, and obviously I wasn't there for that one, but the only one that I could compare it to actually is Surname's fall at Ascot, because when he fell, the whole place just went dead. Everything just went so quiet. And I remember watching the jockey coming in, and he was shaking his head, and the owners burst out crying. And I went, oh God, no. Oh no. And there was a part of me thinking, we can't ask Paul Nicholls to do a preview with us after this. This is devastating. And I've never heard a cheer like it when he got up. The whole place just erupted into madness. And I was delighted that happened at Ascot and not at Cheltenham, because you would just immediately assume, oh yeah, the Cheltenham crowd are going to do that, because it proves what a great course Ascot is, but also just how great fans of racing are. And I think that the same for me. I had the 50 quid accumulator on Dovan, Underso,
50.
Faugheen, and Any
I
Power.
think mine was 15 or something, but it's still a big. I don't even. Yeah, go on.
The money was already in my head. The balance was already there, and I just remember doing how, and it didn't matter because I thought she was gone. I just thought, what a depressing, and like, how do you even pick up from there? And when she got up, that was a relief, and the money doesn't really matter then at the end of that. Those kind of things are surreal, and that's like, maybe it is lockdown, but maybe it's the sport, and that's why we're reminiscing in such detail about racehorses, because that's what they do to you. They get you right there.
Goshen falling in the Triumph had him at 25-1. I'm standing at the last going, right, and everyone knows this. You don't even need to. I've explained to all my mates who wouldn't be, some of them wouldn't have followed him for the whole season, right? He's going to go to the right here. Oh, Jamie, he's doing brilliant. He's bringing him to the right here now, and he's just going to steady up. Yeah. And then the horse kept, it was a weird. It wasn't like any Powers one. It was just what's happened? And then everyone just groaned. But it's that theatre. And look, when you look back on it, you just, that being part of that sport atmosphere, it's almost priceless. And that's maybe a cliche, but the horse was okay at the end of the day, and it's just a sporting drama at its finest. And I think we need to promote that more in terms of horse racing. And you mentioned a little bit in the coverage in terms of, it's about the horses, it's about the jockeys, it's about the trainers, it's about the stories. It's not always about the betting. The betting adds to it, definitely. But being part of the sport, like the likes of Any Power Redemption, then winning the Champion Hurdle, like you said.
Well, that was the thing, and that's what I got that so badly wrong, and I'm kind of glad that I did, because she only subbed at the last minute. Like, she had the day that she ran on her seasonal reappearance in a hood was the day Faugheen got injured, and she then subs in for him. And you're thinking, one run? On the back of one run, can she win a Champion Hurdle? And she goes and does that. And there's part of you thinking, she'd have won that by 50 lengths last year at the Mares Hurdle. And there's another part of you that thinks, what if Faugheen, it was sad that he couldn't line up, but if he hadn't lined up, she would not have had that moment. And it was breathtaking, but particularly for Ruby, because and I love the Paddy Power ad. There's a company that market brilliantly. And that ad of the troll having a go at him, and then they pick him up in the Jeep and 40 miles an hour. Right, jump off. So there's a tenner, get a cab home. That was priceless. But like, the idea that someone would throw themselves off a horse at Cheltenham when history is there is just pathetic and idiotic. The man could have been killed, and particularly with the amount of bones that he's broken. And you could see what it meant to him to get that vengeance the next year, then for her to go and win. It meant a lot.
Yeah, I think what I fell in love with horse racing over in Cheltenham was the Ruby chants, and Ruby. Yeah. And then you see start off Ruby, and then on the nights out, then you get into the Kaiser Chiefs. It's just amazing. And like you said, the jockeys, the horses, the stories. But yeah, the redemption for Any Power. I remember that celebration exactly like you can, where he stands up. I think jockeys should do more of that in the big meetings. They need to work on the celebrations, because you've got soccer players, they nail it. And, a lot of times jockeys, I know they're concentrating, but if you're about to win, get up and give it
go nuts. Go nuts. Can you give me 1 second, Daniel? Do you mind? I just need to do something.
Cool, Emmet. Listen, tell us a little bit, for those that don't necessarily follow horse racing, I guess, from a start in a horse's life, really, and then moving into flat or possibly a drums horse, how well they're looked after in these stables.
Impeccably. And that's one of the things that I think the sport needs to focus on as well, is to trust itself, trust the fact that it is very well looked after. Having been to Coolmore and Ballylynch Stud and the Irish National Stud, like, young horses, when a foal is born, every single thing that could be done to protect that foal and the mare is done. Everything that could be given to them to be nurtured in the right way is done, and that's across the board, Ireland, UK, France, because it has to be. These are professional athletes, and in the same way that you would nurture a young player coming through or a young athlete coming through, you will nurture that talent as well, because you have to nurture that talent. And they're given everything. And in some cases, particularly places like Godolphin and Darley and Coolmore, the best of everything. But everybody will do all they can to ensure that their horse has the best possible life, because it's in their own interest to do so. And also, you can't not work in this industry and not become attached to the animals that you're involved with. So there's a homelessness crisis in Ireland. There's a homelessness crisis in the UK. That's something that's a far bigger concern than welfare of racehorses. They're given everything they can be given, and they're treated brilliantly. Some of them will end up being stars, and they will live the high life and be pampered left, right, and center. Others won't quite get to that level. They might be mediocre, but they're still going to be loved. They're still going to be well looked after. And inevitably, there will be situations where a horse has to be retired through injury, or somebody can't afford the training fees anymore, and things go wrong, and they end up with a racehorse trust or a racehorse welfare farm. And it was sad during Rona to see one of them almost collapse, and particularly when the funding wasn't that much given the amounts of money that's available in the sport. But the fact that they are there is another indication that people will do all they can to ensure that racehorses are given the very, very best possible start to life and the very best possible life that they can be given. There's always going to be bad stories, but that's because we're garbage at times. And most of us are nice. 90% of us are nice, but in all things, there will be some people who aren't. And occasionally you will have a situation where someone falls through the cracks, or someone breaches the rules. The stock market is littered with stories of people who engaged in embezzlement. Wherever there is the opportunity to make money, somebody's going to cheat. And if humans are prepared to pump themselves full of steroids, they'll do it to an animal they're training as well, whether it's a greyhound or a horse. But those stories are incredibly rare. And I think we really need to focus and remember, because there's a lot of misinformation that gets put out by the likes of Animal Aid and PETA. Like, nobody should listen to these people. I mean, particularly PETA. In a way, how could you not get behind people for ethical treatment of animals? Sounds great, doesn't it? And then you realize their modus operandi is nobody should have a pet. Nobody should. Nobody should have anything to do with animals whatsoever. All right, well, what happens to racehorses then? They die because no one's going to be feeding them. No one's going to be looking after them. The breed will not exist. So there's no logic to them, and no logic to what they're saying. But the sport does all it can to ensure that racehorses are well looked after, and that is definitely something. I think in some ways, actually, we probably put more of an emphasis on looking after the horses, and maybe not enough of an emphasis on looking after jockeys and stable staff. And that is something Josh Apiafi was talking about it on Sky Sports Racing on the Racing Debate, and also in a piece for the Racing Post about the tragic suicide of Liam Treadwell, that for people who leave the sport, that they should be able to, if you've been a jockey, you should be able to have a lifetime pass to go to the races. And the difference that might make to some people to just be there on a race course. You're no longer in the sport anymore, but you can be on a race course and not have to worry about how much it's going to cost you. And even just being around it that way might help people. It's not going to help everybody. It's not going to fix every problem, but it could be a help, and it's a start, and it's a nice gesture. And when crowds are not going to be a thing this year, realistically, it mightn't even be a thing next year, but that's something that we can do. I would say that we look after our horses far better than we look after ourselves.
Yeah, that was a particular point passing there earlier this year. I suppose aside from that lifetime pass and get people involved in the races, what more can be done so these jockeys don't end up, because it's such a buzz, I'd say. I can only imagine the buzz of being on a horse. We mentioned already, say, a Ruby Walsh in Cheltenham in 2016. And if any of these jockeys experience a big meeting and they don't quite make it in the sport, or decide to move on to something else, it's very hard for them to replace that buzz. How can horse racing do more to support those jockeys?
Don't know. And the reason I don't know is because the same could be said about football. The same could be said about GAA. If you and I have trained since we were teenagers to play for our county, and you make it, and I don't, and now I'm no longer involved in GAA. Like maybe I do my tendon, my cruciate's gone, and that's it. I can't play hurling for Erin's Own anymore. That's going to really affect your mind, because you've strived for that your entire life, and now it's gone. You can't do it anymore. How do you get past that? Does going to training and seeing the lads train and hanging out with your friends, does that work? Does that suppress it? I don't know. There's an awful lot more jockeys who won't make it than will, and there's a lot of jockeys who will taste a brief glimpse of success, and then it's gone. And people like Ruby Walsh and Tony McCoy, who just seem to win every single week, every day. Johnny Murtagh, I'm amazed at how grounded they are. I'm amazed at how level-headed they are. They never really got carried away with the hype. They never really let themselves be taken away by it. They stay quite grounded. And I think that you have to have a certain mentality in life for certain things to work. But the industry, I don't have the answer, but the industry has to come up with something. Something has to be done. And one of the sad things about it is that the more you learn about depression, the more you realize that it's not necessarily talking about it and pushing it out there. Some people don't want to have to say it, that something's not right. They want to have you come to them and say, "Are you okay?" But there's only so many times you can ask that question. So it's an incredibly delicate and incredibly sensitive thing that there probably isn't a right answer for. But there's enough people in racing, between owners, trainers, jockeys, stable staff, bloodstock industry, the governing body of racing in Ireland and the UK, if we just focus on our own jurisdictions, that something could be done, something can be done. And giving someone, a former jockey, a lifetime pass is a help. Giving them access to free counselling, I don't see how that's a bad thing. I don't see how that can't be done. And encouraging them to talk, encouraging them to get those feelings out there, because you're so right, Daniel. If you manage to get to the point where you're just winning a race at Plumpton, the buzz you must get from that. I used to get a buzz if the horse that I was riding jumped cleanly and didn't make a fault. But, oh my God. Scoring a goal in a football match, the buzz that you get from that, it's incredible. So what is it like if you win an actual prize and a trophy's been handed to you and you're on Sky and people are talking about you on Twitter? What is that like? And then it's gone. I honestly don't have the answer. It's going to take someone an awful lot smarter than me, but something does have to be done.
No, 100% agree. I don't think anyone would disagree. I want to just mention with the horse welfare, the last thing on the use of the whip. You're a big advocate, yourself and Kevin were back a couple of years back when you were working together. For those that aren't involved in racing and they may ask the obvious question when they're watching a race, like my mother all the time, oh, look at them using the whip. Can you explain firstly, I shouldn't be using the word whip, should I? Should be using I've actually forgotten.
Everybody else does.
Yeah,
everybody else does.
So can you tell us just a little bit, for those outside of horse racing, what the whip is for, and you know how heavy it is, or light, or very.
Well, my mother does the same as your mother. If a horse could be going 10 lengths clear, and she goes, "What? Don't get the persuader out. Don't do that." So a whip is a ProCush. That's the brand name. So if we deem it like Hoover is a vacuum cleaner, but we all call them Hoovers. The ProCush is air cushioned. So if you and I were to go on a treadmill now, and we started jogging, and then we got up to top speed, and Danny Mullins came along and gave the two of us a belt with an air cush, we'll feel it, but we won't be in pain. You might feel something if you're just standing still and there's no adrenaline coursing through you. But you're not going to be hurt. So the idea that the persuader, the ProCush, the whip, that is a weapon, like whip sounds really harsh. It sounds like a terrible phrase to use. Well, that is the device. It's used because racehorses are big and they have a mind of their own. And if you achieve top speed and you are heading towards the line your horse is probably traveling in excess of 40 miles per hour. And it's the only sport in the world where you're followed by an ambulance. And you need to be able to control that horse. So you have reins in your hands and you have your feet are in the stirrups, but you need the ProCush to be able to encourage the horse to go that little bit faster. And essentially the ProCush is designed to activate. It's a bit like our fight or flight system that's built into us from way back in the day when we were cavemen and fighting each other for food and fighting each other against and fighting against predators. It's built into the horse's DNA to react to that. And some horses are funny. If you use a ProCush or you use a whip on them, they'll just go, well, screw you, and down tools and just stop. The same as people react differently. Every horse is unique. So some of them will rebel against it and just go, I'm not having that, son. Others won't do anything unless they're given a tap, if I put it gently, and others need it to keep a horse on a straight line. Because if you consider how dangerous it is, really, if you really think about the dangers, and people have died, jockeys have died on the gallops, they've died in races. So you need that device in order to keep your horse straight, or if the horse gets a notion, and we've seen this happen. Daryl Jacob was plowed through a railing in Cheltenham, and it was a metal railing at the time, down at the start of the county hurdle. And I think his leg was broken in 2 places and his shoulder was damaged as well. He suffered a horrific injury. And it was because the horse just bolted out of nowhere, just got very excited, probably spooked by the crowd. The horse was fine. He was in bits. And if he'd been able to get his whip in time, maybe he would have been able to control the horse and ease him and calm him, but he couldn't. So you have to think about what a horse can do. Antonius Pius and Jamie Spencer, I only mentioned this last week on the show with Nick Luck and Jess Stafford, that if you're going to have a conversation about a jockey causing interference to another jockey, and you're going to then say, you intentionally did that, you went out to harm your opponent so you could win. If I'm a defense attorney, I'll say, well, there's Antonius Pius and Jamie Spencer. Do you think he deliberately threw himself into the rail in the French 2000 Guineas? No, the horse did it because the horse was a bit nuts. He just had a quirk about him. He did the same thing in the Breeders' Cup Mile. He ducked in behind an opponent when the race was his. There was a thing about the horse's mind. Horses are unpredictable. They're not Formula One cars. You can't tell the horse what to do, and the horse can't tell you what it's going to do. It has a mind of its own. So you need that for the safety of jockeys, and you need it for the safety of other horses as well. It doesn't look good when Christophe Soumillon is giving Thunder Snow 37 lashes of the whip in the Breeders' Cup Classic. It looks terrible. And they're right. The jurisdictions are right to be banning excessive use of the whip, but you can't ban it. It is badly needed. And this is the real thing. Even whatever your stance on the whip is, if the whip, for some reason, if British racing, let's say, because they're the ones who've really come under pressure, it's not as big a talking point in Ireland. If British horse racing did away with the whip tomorrow, that won't be enough. Then they'll come for jumps racing. Well, it's unethical. If you've just admitted that the whip was a problem, therefore horses shouldn't be jumping obstacles, that's unethical, ban that. And then that goes. And then they'll start coming for the flat. They won't stop until they get everything, because that's the way the world is now. So we need to have faith in the system and faith in the sport, and realize that this has been part of the sport for a very long time, and that the device that we have now is a good device that is beneficial to jockeys.
Absolutely. Like horse racing.
As I fall over.
For those not on YouTube, Emmet nearly went there in the chair. You just get the wire there. I suppose it goes back to horse racing needing to stick up for itself, really. Moving on, last thing I want to talk about before moving on to quickfire, Irish racing. For myself and people my age, the Irish racing broadcast deal doesn't affect us, because if we're ever out on the go, which tend to be a lot, we can just stream it. There's other avenues, but I'd always notice it for my dad here at home, if he wants to watch the race, and we don't have racing TV, but of course we would have Sky Sports Racing, what was at the races. What are your thoughts on how that's gone? I don't want to put you in too much of a difficult position, but what are your thoughts on the deal overall and potential long-term implications for Irish racing essentially going behind a paywall?
You're not putting me in a difficult position because I've already said it, and I've said it on the podcast, and I've said it in interviews, and I've been on Look on Sunday, and we'll be on it again. It's a great show. It's a terrible deal for Irish racing. It's a terrible deal for the product, and what it was pitched as was the Netflix of Irish racing. Well, you know that rural broadband in Ireland is a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. It's nowhere near as good as what we have as what the UK have, and it's nowhere near as good as what it should be for us. So even if you want to watch it online, that doesn't work. So when they offer when things are too busy with UK racing and they put it online, that's a nice idea in theory, but only if the broadband infrastructure is there, and it's not in Ireland. It just isn't. That's not their fault. It's also not Racing TV's fault that they got the rights. You can't criticize them for that. They have it, and they'll have it for another few years. I doubt they'll get it next time. I would be shocked if it was renewed. It will, I suspect, very strongly go back to Sky. And they have to work with what they have now, and they'll do that. But I wouldn't be critical of RTV because it's not their fault that they were in a position to take something, and they certainly couldn't say no to it. But is it beneficial to Irish racing? No. Why did the governing body of Irish racing sign a contract that essentially signed away their own control of the broadcast rights? That's what I'd like to know. Who came up with that idea, and who thought it was a good idea that they could not decide themselves what they wanted? Because when you've got Michael O'Leary and Willie Mullins and Gordon Elliott and Johnny Murtagh speaking out about it and giving out about the fact that it's going behind a paywall, that's not good. And you mentioned your father. My uncles, a good friend of mine, Jim Delaney, they don't have Racing TV. And there's lots of friends of mine who also don't have it, who work in racing, who write about it, and they're not paying that money each month. I have it. I like it. But again, like you, if I'm out and about, I'll just look at my phone and I can see it there. And we are kind of moving more towards that way. Like what broadcasting was 15 years ago is not what it is today. The whole landscape is, if you said to me 15 years ago, hey, will you come on my show? Yeah, Daniel, what is it? Well, you can hear it on your phone, or you can watch it on your laptop. It's not a radio show. It's this podcasting. It's like, who the hell is this guy? And what kind of madness are you talking? The world has changed so vastly and quickly that some of us are keeping up with it, and other people are thinking back in the old days of broadcast rights and how important they were. And I don't necessarily think that they're as important as they once were. They are when it goes behind a paywall. And you're right, not everybody in Ireland is going to have Sky Sports Racing, but if you've got the Sky package, you almost certainly have it. It's almost certainly there. Whereas you then have to go and fork out 30 or close to 40 quid per month for a channel. And most people aren't going to do that. And they're certainly not going to do it now. Not in this day and age. And I think the talk about the figures of how many people are watching Irish racing is mysteriously quiet. And it's probably because they don't really want it out there. Again, I'm not having a go at RTV. It's not their fault they got the rights. They were in the position to take it. They would have been insane to say no. But it's not a good spot for them because their schedule becomes completely overburdened. And you have brilliant pundits and presenters on that station who now are not able to fully give their insight into the sport because they've got to cut to Naas, or they've got to cut to Wexford, or cut to Chelmsford, or wherever it is that they're going to be covering, because there's such a congestion of fixtures. So we're a sport that has two dedicated channels and a terrestrial broadcaster in both Ireland and the UK. That's remarkable. And that's something that we should celebrate, but it needs to be shared around better. And I would hope in 3 years' time, contract talks are probably actually coming up pretty soon, really, when you think about it, that it will revert back to Sky. And I think that Irish racing will probably try and save face in the meantime, but we'll quietly try and get that done. And it would be a good deal for all.
It reminds me of the Sky Sports taking the GA rights. And so a lot of games, a lot of older people. And the people that the GA seem, they want to get the younger, exciting market where they're not really thinking of the people that have lived in the sport or know the sport for that long,
Yeah, and that's a really interesting one as well, because that's been debated till the cows come home. I know Wooly on the GA Hour hates the idea of Sky having GA rights. I understand it. I see where the GAA are coming from. Like they tried something with TV3 back in the day, Virgin Media One. Now they tried it with them, and then they decided, well, let's go with Sky. And look, you're giving access to the Irish in the UK to be able to watch it, and giving access to them much better. And Sky can promote the sport an awful lot. But yeah, there is a point to be made that a lot of people will have Sky Sports, a lot of people won't, and those who don't, who are only interested in GAA, have had that taken from them, and that's tough. But it's slightly different in that if you look at the broadcast ratings for the Champions League on BT Sport, they're awful. They are awful. UEFA don't care. Money, it's all coming in, it's flying in. But BT hasn't hit in the same way that Sky has. And there's a reason for that. Sky's been around since the 80s. They've been building this platform for so long. They're mega. They're a juggernaut. So they know what they're doing. And the content has to be king, but the customer has to be right as well. And it's a tricky one. But I do think that Sky will get the rights when it comes back around.
See, I actually think like sports like football can afford to, throw themselves behind a paywall like BT because they're so popular, universally popular, and always will be popular. But I'd put horse racing in the same bracket as a cricket that's gone behind Sky, and then Sky again promotes cricket brilliantly. But are you missing out?
How many people are watching it though?
Exactly. Yeah. Obviously to a lesser extent the BT, but I guess that's sports have to juggle that up. Sports like horse racing and cricket need money as well, so we do need to mention that. But Emmet, you've been amazing with your time. We're just going to finish with a quick fire round, if that's all right.
All right.
This, as I keep saying this, people sick of me saying this has turned into the not so quick fire round. So don't. Uh-oh. If you start going off on one, that's fine. We can always edit out. So here's a tough one to start. All right. And no offense sitting here. Excuse the pun. Flat or jumps racing?
Jumps.
Okay. I thought it'd be difficult. I think you mentioned that before. I still thought he'd be. Will I add in?
I love both. Honestly, I love both. But if that conversation that we had about Cheltenham makes you go jumps.
Yeah. Your proudest achievement in broadcasting?
Oh God, creating the Final Furlong Podcast.
Your favorite horse?
Hurricane Fly.
Favorite jockey?
Retired or still going?
Go both. Yeah, sorry, the look you gave me when I said both.
Jeez, who's my favorite jockey? God, I think probably Tony McCoy. He wasn't as graceful as Ruby, but there was just something incredible about him, and he just wanted to win every time. And favorite jockey now is probably Christophe Soumillon.
Oh, okay.
Despite the fact that he leathered Thunder Snow left, right, and centre, I'm a big Christophe Soumillon fan.
Favorite bet or your best bet that has come off? You mentioned a couple earlier, so I want a full after time in here.
Oh dear.
Best bet.
At Christmas time, I did a lucky 63. I had 5 out of the 6 winners, and I nearly fainted with the win. And that was my best bet. I absolutely loved that one. The one that let me down was Red Hot Philly Peppers.
Oh, I've a few times. Willie Mullins.
Yeah, to be fair to her, she wasn't even in the frame. So, and that was actually a good thing, because I think if she had finished second, beating the nose, it would have been But I made a smart decision that day. I didn't watch the racing until afterwards, and by the time the third horse had gone in, I was like, "Oh dear, okay." And then the fourth, Red Hot Philly Peppers gets beaten, and I was on one of Joseph's horses in the bumper, and he beat a hot pot for Willie Mullins. And I just ran around the place like a lunatic. So yeah, the lucky 63.
Your worst ever bet/tip, if you can. I know there may be one or two.
Oh God.
What did you get?
I know what my worst ever tip was. Anyway, I know for a fact what my worst ever tip was. It was Moonracer in the Champion Hurdle. Dear God, I got that one badly wrong.
The year before, and he went straight to the Champion, didn't he, instead of Supreme?
Yeah. he'd
2017.
beaten Ballyandy, and then Ballyandy won the Betfair Hurdle, and they went nuts and went for the champion, and he was pulled up. Yeah, that was a disaster. Probably that as well. I think my worst ever bet was betting way more than I could afford to lose on Brave Inca at Punchestown, and he was beaten by Max Joy. And I remember it was literally Tesco noodles for the month. It was a valuable lesson to learn, but oh my God, I felt so low.
Would you rather, as a trainer, or no, as an owner, obviously, I was going to say trainer, sorry, start that again. Would you rather, as an owner, if you ever own a horse, to win a Gold Cup or a Grand National?
Gold Cup.
Okay. Favorite Cheltenham memory?
Hurricane Fly regaining his champion hurdle crown.
Wow. I know you're big into the TV series. Give our listeners a couple of TV series, and don't go on now like you do in the Final Furlong for 4 or 5 minutes.
All right, here's a soliloquy now about the horses, about the TV shows that you should be watching. I think that it's actually very important that everybody watches Chernobyl. Have you seen that, Daniel?
I actually saw it on flying. Where did I fly last? Thailand. I got lucky because I don't have Sky, HBO or whatever. Yeah, it's on Sky. I don't actually have Sky, so I got lucky.
Sky
managed Sky Atlantic. Yeah, so I managed to. What's the word? Binge it. Yeah, it's incredible, absolutely incredible.
Did you binge it on the flight?
Yeah, I say between, yeah, because there might have been 2 flights and there's not too many episodes from memory. What is there?
5.
Yeah. So yeah, I binged it. Yeah,
it's a very, very tough watch. It's a very, very tough watch, but my God, it's incredible. The leads in it, Jared Harrison, Stellan Skarsgård, and Emily Watson are phenomenal. Even the minutiae details and expressions that Stellan Skarsgård does when he's given this piece of news by Jared Harris's character, which I don't want to spoil it on anybody. Oh, Chernobyl, what could that be about? How is that going to end, I wonder? It's an incredibly strong performance from everybody in it, and I do think that it's really important that we all watch it. I didn't know as much as I thought I did, and it's a disturbing watch. It's not something that you're going to look at and feel relaxed about, but my God, it's incredible television. And then to cleanse your palate afterwards, The Expanse, a sci-fi show on Amazon, which was originally made by Sci-Fi. Amazon have it now. Thomas Jane, actually Jared Harris, who plays the hero, if you like, of Chernobyl, is in this as a gangster. It's a sci-fi drama, and it's bloody brilliant.
Brilliant. Liverpool to win the league again next season, or Tiger Roll to win 3 Grand Nationals?
Oh, wait, I can only have one.
Yeah.
Well, Michael O'Leary's leaving racing, so Liverpool to win the league again.
Wow, okay. I had Tiger Roll. I had Tiger Roll 4-6.
101 Tiger Roll. No,
101.
seriously. Honestly, we won the league now, so that's that. Like, we can just bow out gracefully, and whatever happens. Horses like Tiger Roll only come around once in a lifetime, and I'd love to see him win a third. It's a bitter disappointment he didn't get to go for it this year. The fact that he's staying in training and going next year tells you that what Michael was saying was just trying to play everything down. So I hope he can do it next year.
2 last questions. The famous cause of causes versus Tiger Roll debate. Any regrets? Should you have seen the signs early on that all the right faces were actually on Tiger Roll?
I'd like to.
Country 2018, by the way.
I'd like to correct the record here now. I'd like to correct the record here because Mr. Blake went on and on and on about how Tiger Roll working the Tiger Roll can't do anything wrong. And then on the morning of the cross-country chase, I put the microphone to him and I say, right, on the opening show on ITV4, I say, Kevin, who do you like in the cross-country? Cause of causes, Tiger Roll. And he backed off. He went, I don't know, he didn't have to jump the national fence when he won here. I'm not sure about Tiger Roll on this ground. And then he goes and bolts up, and he can take all the glory. And he did the same thing for the Grand National. He was all about him, and then on the day, buckled and decided not to. I got that badly wrong. It was kind of weird because I backed Cause of Causes at 10-1. Sorry, the year before. And I think for that reason, and the fact that I was on him when he won the Ladbroke Hurdle for Gordon Elliott. So he's been a very good horse to me over the years. There's actually, can you see this, I wonder? There is a picture in my studio, which is 3 pictures of Cause of Causes winning at Cheltenham. So when he won the National Chase, the Kim Muir, and then the cross country. So that is pride of place on the wall.
I could only see the Golden Gate Bridge, which is
dang it!
Which anyone not on YouTube is the background.
Dang it! So there's a picture that was sent to me by a listener to the Final Furlong podcast, and it's a montage of Cause's victory. So I couldn't get away from him, but I got it badly wrong. Tiger Roll bolted up. Poor old Cause has never raced again, but he was a brilliant horse. And yeah, I was badly wrong in the day.
I mugged in shamefully with Kevin Blake's tips once, told everyone to back him, and pretty much similar to Kevin, without watching that, going, the ground's gone against him. The ground's gone against Causes. But I'd already backed Tiger Roll, thank God. Final question. Give our listeners, and I know you'll say it because everyone has looked at the Cheltenham Antepost 2021 markets at some point between March and now. So have you got anyone you're keeping an eye on for the 2021 festival that you might say, look, keep an eye, you don't have to back it now, just keep an eye on an Antepost perspective? Because I've had
a bet.
Oh, wow.
I've had a bet. I've done a bet.
Is this an exclusive?
I don't think I've said this on the show. Oh, I think maybe I gave away a little bit of it. I don't think I said the whole thing. No, I didn't either. So, surprise, surprise, the first one is Epatante. She wins the champion hurdle again. I mean, I think that's not going to take
What odds is she actually?
I have a feeling she's 3-1 or 4-1. I'm just going to check this now so that I'm absolutely certain. If I click my betting history on this particular bookmaker, I have to remember now, is this the one I bet with? It is indeed. Hold on. Please hold caller. Here we go. Donald Trump to win the election. Yeah. Seriously, he's going to win. It's a disaster and he's going to win again. So, hey, we may as well.
Joe Biden's 1.72 or something on the exchange, though.
Joe Biden's mind, God help him, is gone. It's gone. He is not going to win. There was a political. I'm interested a lot in politics, and there was a study in America recently, a survey. 67% of Americans do not want to admit who they're voting for. That's 67% of Americans who are going to vote for Trump. My bet's for Cheltenham. It's a lucky 31. Envoy Alain, and I've backed him for the
Marsh.
Supreme.
Oh, you mean Malone Road? Or
no, Envoy Alain to win the Supreme. That was his hurdle, and not the. Am I right about that?
No, Envoy Alain be Marsh Chase next year.
Envoy Alain to win the Arkle.
That's it.
That's what.
Oh, you've gone for the Arkle. Oh,
I've gone for the Arkle. Yeah. I got there in the end. Epatante to win the champion hurdle, 4-1. The Boss's Oscar to win the RSA at 40s. Sporting John to take the JLT, or the Marsh as it's now known, 50s. And Album Photo wins another Gold Cup 5-1. There's that bet. It pays 1.2 million. I'll see you in Dubai.
That's a great way to finish. Emmet, you've been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for coming on.
You're a gentleman. Really enjoyed it, Daniel, and best of luck with the show.
Appreciate it.